My uncle ordered popovers from the restaurant's bill of fare, and when they were served, he regarded them with a penetrating stare. Then he spoke great words of wisdom as he sat there on that chair. "To eat these things," said my uncle, "you must exercise great care. You may swallow down what's solid, but you must spit out the air." And as you partake of the world's bill of fare, that's darn good advice to follow. Do a lot of spitting out the hot air, and be careful what you swallow. The words of Dr. Seuss in a commencement address. Hello once again, I'm Don Jackson. We share the same air as every other living creature on the planet. But have you ever wondered what it might be like to be air? One of our most familiar dreams is that of flying, and I guess that would be as close to being the air itself as we could get. But Margaret Atwood, in Variation on the Word Sleep, took that idea to the next step. I would like to be the air that inhabits you for a moment. Only, I would like to be that unnoticed and that necessary. This is the heartbeat of the internet, with air apparent. If you had to describe the air around us without using scientific terms, what would you say? One of my sources described it this way. You cannot see air. Unless the wind is blowing, you do not feel it. It is tasteless, and yet it is the most familiar of all substances. Air fills every space not otherwise occupied. Every empty dish, box, can, or other container is actually filled to the brim with air. Every time you breathe, you fill your lungs with air. With the fresh air, life-giving oxygen is carried to your bloodstream. Neither animals nor plants could live without the ocean of air in which we move. And yet the air you breathe probably exists in no other place except on this earth. End quote. Yes, we have found thin layers of atmosphere elsewhere in our scientific explorations of the solar system and the galaxy, but nothing like the quantity we would need to survive. Again, I quote, "This great ocean of air you breathe probably exists for hundreds of miles above your head. The air presses on your whole body from all directions, just as the water would do if you were at the bottom of the sea. The total pressure of the great column of air over your head amounts to several tons, and yet you do not notice it at all. It does not knock you down, because the pressure comes from all sides at once. It does not crush you, because the air and fluids inside your body also exert a pressure to balance that of the air outside." End quote. Could that possibly be part of the answer to how a magician might seem to make a person levitate? Maybe all that magician would have to figure out is how to adjust the balance inside. One of my favorite magicians, illusionists, is II.Blade. Do you remember his street magic series that aired for so long on TV? Some of his tricks proved that in stage magic, even magic performed on the street, that the hand is indeed quicker than the eye, or the feet in his case. One of his most famous stunts is appearing to levitate off the sidewalk in front of stunned passers-by. How does he do it? Or at least, how does he make it appear that he's floating on air? In the end, of course, it's really nothing more than an illusion, a sleight of hand, a magician distracting you just enough to pull off a stunt. Street magicians have it so much harder, of course. They have to rely on the old-fashioned tricks of the trade to convince those who are standing much closer than they would be if they were in an audience in front of a stage that what is happening is actually real. Here is an experiment which will show you how strong air pressure is. The next time you take a drink with a straw in it, put your finger on the top of the straw and lift the straw from the glass. The liquid will stay in the straw because it is held there by air pressure from below. When you take your finger off the straw, the liquid will run out, pushed out by the air pressing on the top. Another experiment with air is to stuff a dry handkerchief into the bottom of a glass in such a way that it will not fall out when the glass is turned upside down. Push the upside-down glass into a jar or pitcher of water until the glass is completely covered. When you take it out, you can pull the handkerchief out dry. The pressure of the air inside the glass keeps the water from entering. Diving bells used to rescue men from disabled submarines work on the same principle. Air is just about the same the world over. There might be some differences in the amount of moisture present or in the quantity of dust particles." End quote. Edgar Allan Poe wrote, "Was it fate that on this July midnight, was it not fate whose name is also sorrow, that bade me pause before the garden gate to breathe the incense of those slumbering roses?" Writers do suggest that there are differences in everyday settings as well as magical places, like a garden. You might not think of a garden as a magical place at first, but consider this. Alexander Smith wrote, "My garden, with its silence and pulses of fragrance that come and go on the airy undulations, affects me like sweet music. Care stops at the gates and gazes at me wistfully through the bars." And this excerpt from Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. And then the unspeakable purity and freshness of the air. There was just enough heat to enhance the value of the breeze. Speaking of breezes, one of the things we can learn from a dog is this: allow the experience of fresh air and the wind in your face to be pure ecstasy. Our version of ecstasy goes beyond the simple pleasure of the air on your face. Our ecstasy is when the air feels charged. This is an excerpt from The Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love by Oscar Abuelos. And I loved you, Anna. Don't think I ever forgot that time we went walking in Holguin, even if it was a long, long time ago. We walked so far from your parents' house, headed for the park, and whenever we passed through the shadows where no one could see us, your hand tightened around mine, and the air around us seemed charged, and then we'd kiss. On a night when the fragrance of summer flowers fills the still night air, and the stars provide the only illumination you need to see by, you're likely to sense something in the air. Conrad Aiken tells us of another magical place that most would like to believe exists, and a scene I think we all would like to witness just once. He writes, "One by one, in the moonlight, there, neighing far off on the haunted air, the unicorns come down to the sea." I climb up a mountain to breathe in the air and leave behind with each step one more useless care. An excerpt from Gratitude by Mark Rickerby from Chicken Soup to Inspire the Body and Soul. I remember the story of one singer-songwriter who, in the process of climbing a mountain, finds the right frame of mind so that the music comes to him. concentrating so intensely on finding the handholds, he says that the music or a lyric line seems to appear out of thin air. Early people asked why the air didn't just simply vanish out into space. The air does thin out, but there are other forces at work. From the Reader's Digest collection Why in the World was this explanation. Early astronomers believed the universe to be filled with air. If only they could find a suitable vehicle, perhaps a chariot drawn by birds, travel to the moon would be much like a journey to some distant country. These days, we know that adventurers into space need special suits and oxygen. Not until 1648 was it shown that the Earth's atmosphere thins out with altitude. If the universe were filled with air, then planets and other bodies would gradually slow down in their orbits. Eventually, the moon would crash to Earth, and Earth itself would inevitably succumb to the gravitational pull of the sun, ending its life in the solar furnace. If you turn on the gas tap of a kitchen stove, the gas soon spreads into the room. That is because the gas burner has no gravitational pull of its own. The Earth's gravity keeps its gases locked around it. To escape, they need to achieve the speed of astronauts in a space rocket, at least 7 miles a second. And this, luckily for us, they cannot do. Herbert Hoover wrote, "To go fishing is the chance to wash one's soul with pure air." End quote. There is an Indian belief that everyone is a house of 4 rooms: a physical, a mental, an emotional, and a spiritual. Most of us tend to live in one room most of the time, but unless we go into every room every day, even if only to keep it aired, we are not complete. Words of Rumer Godden from House of 4 Rooms, published by Morrow. A lot of people are literally doing that right about now. We are changing the air in our homes after a long cold winter. It may also be a good time to clear some of the cobwebs from our mind. Maybe when we feel our heart can't hold any more hurt, what we need to do is give it a good airing. This is an excerpt from the 1998 edition of the Friendship Book of Francis Gay. This is called The Healing Place by C.M. Douglas. My heart was full of sorrow, so I took it to the hill and bathed it in the clear burn when all the air was still. I held it to the west wind and warmed it in the sun, in peaceful purple silence, till the healing had begun. Look at the background of my website, and you might just be able to imagine the peaceful purple silence. John Milton wrote, "In those vernal seasons of the year, when the air is calm and pleasant, it were an injury and sullenness against nature not to go out and see her riches and partake in her rejoicing with heaven and earth." In the Reader's Digest collection Why in the World, it said, "Some people ask why, if the Earth's atmosphere spins with the planet and at the same speed, we should not have the same weather all the time, an endless succession of windless days. Luckily for us, the world's weather is constantly changing. If it brings fierce storms, it gives us gentle rains, the enveloping silence of snow, dappled clouds, and golden sunshine, the stuff of both poetry and everyday conversation." End quote. The winter of 2013 through 14 will be remembered for its extreme cold. Unfortunately, our winters are not like those that frightened the people in Game of Thrones. They don't come and last for decades, unless you're in the middle of an ice age. Barbara Stanton in the Detroit Free Press wrote, "The cold air that holds cities in its icy grip is a messenger from harsh and distant places. This is the same air that a few days ago musk oxen drew close to protect against. Snowy owls glided through like ghosts. Arctic foxes padded through in silvery nights. It is the breath of life held common by timber wolves, caribou, and you." End quote. Thankfully, winter does not last too long. It can become tiring always breathing in the air that chills your lungs, but eventually our seasons do change. Annie Proulx, in That Old Ace in the Hole, wrote, "It was a roaring spring morning with green in the sky, the air spiced with sand, sagebrush, and aromatic sumac." End quote. We look forward to the gentle months in the year when the air is like a butterfly with frail blue wings. The happy earth looks at the sky and sings. An excerpt from Joy by Joyce Kilmer. Thomas Gray wrote, "Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air." But is it truly wasted? Consider this, and I quote, "Instructions are yet carried on the wind. Trickles of air down hillsides on summer nights bring the scent of skunk and the spice of dried grass. Other creatures know these currents. Bears float their noses on them through the pines at night. Perhaps birds time their migrations by testing cold rivulets. Over several days, thousands of ducks may rise off the marshes of Manitoba and head south just ahead of the ice. We are fascinated with flight in watching other creatures ride the wind. Eagles riding thermals ever higher. Geese riding the northerlies down from the Arctic in the fall." An excerpt from author Peter Steinhardt, who wrote this piece on the wind for the March 1988 issue of Audubon. "I just took my dog outside, and she lifted her nose into the warm breeze, and I would imagine sensed a few of her neighborhood friends out and about. Animals are not the only ones who can gain something from lifting their faces and breathing in the scents that are ferried along." This is an excerpt from Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight by Alexandria Fuller. And I quote, "When the ship veered into the Cape of Good Hope, Mum caught the spicy, heady scent of Africa on the changing wind. She held me up to face the earthy air so that the fingers of warmth pushed back my black curls of hair, and her pale green eyes went clear, glassy. Smell that," she whispered. "That's home." Vanessa was running up and down the deck, unaccountably wild for a child usually so placid. Intoxicated already. I took in a faceful of African air and fell instantly into a fever. End quote. And a little closer to home, here's another experience recounted in the July 1988 issue of Glamour. One windy summer night in the Thousand Islands, I sat on a dock, wrapped in a blanket, watching the big moon skim in and out of fat gray clouds, smelling the thick, fragrant country air, my mind far from ordinary cares. That to me is the essence of summer, an escape from everyday to something more powerful, universal, peaceful. Richard Purdy Wilbur wrote, "Outside the open window, the morning air is all awash with angels." There is something in the air. This something was recognized a very long time ago, but it may only be visible to those with the heart of a poet. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, in one of the sonnets for the Portuguese, wrote, "When our two souls stand up erect and strong, face to face, silent, drawing nigh and nigher, until the lengthening wings break into fire at either curved point, what bitter wrong can the earth do to us, that we should not long be here contented? Think, in mounting higher, the angels would press us on, and aspire to drop some golden orb of perfect song into our deep, dear silence. Let us stay rather on earth, beloved, where the unfit, contrarious moods of men recoil away and isolate pure spirits, and permit a place to stand and love in for a day, with darkness and the death hour rounding it." So, what's this essence that's in the air tonight? A mote of dust? An atom of something that once was? A very old poem describes exactly what it is. Rupert Brooke wrote, "When the white flame in us is gone, and we that lost the world's delight, stiffen in the darkness, left alone to crumble in our separate night. When your swift hair is quiet in death, and through the lips corruption thrust has stilled the labor of my breath. When we are dust, when we are dust, not dead, not undesirous yet, still sentient, still unsatisfied, we'll ride the air and shine and flit round the places where we died, and dance as dust before the sun, and light of foot and unconfined hurry from road to road, and run about the errands of the wind. And every mote on earth or air will speed and gleam down later days, and like a secret pilgrim fare by eager and invisible ways, nor ever rest nor ever lie, till beyond thinking out of view, one mote of all the dust that's I shall meet one atom that was you. Then in some garden, hushed from wind, warm in a sunset's afterglow, the lovers in the flowers will find a sweet and strange, unquiet grow upon the peace and past desiring, so high a beauty in the air, and such a light, and such acquiring, and such a radiant ecstasy there. They'll know not if it's fire or dew, or out of earth, or in the height, singing or flame, or scent or hue, or two that pass in light to light. Out of the garden, higher, higher, but in that instant they shall learn the shattering fury of our fire, and the weak, passionless hearts will burn and faint in that amazing glow until the darkness close above. And they will know, poor fools, they'll know, one moment, what it is to love. Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.